Welcome back, guys. Tool of Tech here, and I am going to show you a little bit about the Godot engine. So, why the Godot engine and not something like Unity, Unreal, or JMonkey engine? Essentially, not JMonkey engine because it's a slow development, and Java is a bit more of a complex language to learn. Not Unity or Unreal because those are not open source, nor do I think they can run on Linux overly well, or at least not with the setup I have. I've tried; it's kind of a nightmare. But I'm choosing Godot because, for one, it has an easily readable coding system called GDScript. It's very similar to Python. And although you could use Python or Boo or whatever they call it in Unity, this is direct. It's integrated into the engine itself, so you know it'll work quite nicely. Also, it's an open source, so if you want, you can actually contribute to it if you know C++ and OpenGL or Vulkan, because this uses or is going to use a Vulkan backend. Vulkan is just a you can essentially see it as a different variation on OpenGL. It's one where you had to implement more stuff yourself, but it can in turn be more powerful because of that. But anyway, this is a pretty simple engine to use. You can do 2D or 3D stuff in it. And yeah, I have the 2.1.1. It's the latest stable release. I literally just downloaded it because I had another version that was outdated. And I also have a tutorial project here. And one thing I went ahead and did is I went and applied an art, scene, script, and sound file hierarchy. And that's just so it's easier to essentially get in there and just work instead of having to figure out, 50 files down, there's my art piece, or 10 files in, there's the script I need. Just have it all organized this way. As we go along, I can just click on one and be like, oh, there's the thing I need. So I was messing around a little earlier, so I'm just going to remove some of this stuff and show you what is going on. So when I click play, I get this nice little window that pops up. I think she's in there. Alright, I had this nice little thing that popped up there, window and everything when I hit play. That probably will not happen with you. So what you want to do is you want to go under Scene and Project Settings, and under Main Scene, you want to have that selected. Go ahead and open up a scene. And it'll ask you, File, go under your scenes. If you have one, I have one already made. That is my main scene. Now if you don't have one made, just go into Scene, New Scene, Create a Scene, go back in. And we're good to go. So we're in the 2D mode right now. You might be in 3D when you first start. If you do, just click the 2D tab, pretty simple. And since it's a 2D work interface we're using, you want to go under here, create a new node. And a node is essentially, if you're not familiar with them, they're small pieces you can reuse multiple times. In Unity, if you've used that, they're called prefabs. And they're really handy because you can just make one node and reuse it several times. So if you have or sorry, not nodes, but actually the scenes you can use several times. But a node is essentially just small pieces you can make into a scene. And scenes don't necessarily need to be scenes. They can be characters. So for example, later on, I'm planning on having a whole scene dedicated to just a character. And what we will later do is import that scene into multiple levels in order to make it easier, instead of recreating the character every time, just having him in his own separate file that you can just import and use it in any level with all his scripts and everything. So we have this main node in here, and this is our root node, which is essentially going to be the base of everything. Without this node, you can't really have much else. Everything is essentially linked to that, and you can have multiple of these. So if you want, you can have like 2 or 3, but typically you only have 1 per file, I do believe. So let's just say this, and overwrite, yes. So when you save it and run it, you'll just get this black, or not black, gray background. Pretty boring. So what I want to do is, I have this a few images I just pulled off Google, and we're going to use that for a background. So let's hit the plus button with the node 2D selected. And it's important to make sure you have the node selected that you want to have a child node of. And the child node is essentially the node that is connected to the higher up node. So for example, if you want a character to have physics applied to them, such so they can fall and take damage, whatever. You would want a physics collider attached with a image. One is the parent, one is the child node. This way, they're always connected. So if the parent node moves, such as applying the logic to the physics, the image moves with it, instead of the image staying behind and the physics piece just moving, which you cannot see on screen, but it's an invisible physics field that works, so you don't have to worry about the math. So what we want to do is we want to create a background, and a background is any image really is called a sprite in 2D games. So we want to do is select sprite, and let's just rename these. World 2D, no 2D, let's call World 2D. And sprite, let's just call background 1, because we will probably have multiple backgrounds essentially later on in the game. So under here, we want to create a image. As you can see, under my arts tab, I have 2 images. One's PNG, one's JPEG, doesn't really matter. I can show you to them here if you'd like. So this one I just got Creative Commons background, just Google it, you'll find it. And I have a smaller image here, and I just looked up background, it was there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Godot again, and under texture where it says null, we're going to click load, and we're going to go into art and select one of these. Now you can see that the center of the image is at the world origin, and the world origin for any 2D application actually is going to be in the top left corner. This is known as 0, 0, and as you go across, this monitor is 1900 by 600. So as you go across, I go to 1900, and that's the X, and there's a Y position, which is 0. And that's the coordinate system that you have at the offset here. So this point is 1900, 0, this is 1900, 600, this would be 0, 600, and I believe you get the point. So we can have it centered, or we can have it off-center. And if you want offset, you have to figure out how much. And if you don't have it centered, it just kind of snaps the corner to it for you, which is handy. Now you can resize the image through here by just dragging those, or we can come down to scale and resize it ourselves manually if you want it to be very accurate, or you just don't like dealing with strange floating point numbers, which are just numbers with multiple decimal places. I apologize for that sound, that was my phone. So let's just go try twice as large, which seems to be big enough. If anything, maybe 1.8 by 1.8, no. There we go, that works. So as you can see, the image works, and we're just going to hit play on the scene. And that is our, what we got there. So not bad for a start. Now, essentially this doesn't do much for us, so what we want to do is probably add some actual things in here. So before we actually do anything character-wise, because that gets into more scripting and such, what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you a little bit more of the engine to see if you guys actually enjoy it. If not, let you guys look for a different one, because this engine isn't for everyone, although I do enjoy it. So if we're going to create new node, I just lost that. There we go. We can see a bunch of nodes that we have. So if you want a 3D node, you have to go into spatial, and it shows you a bunch of spatial 3D nodes you can use. As a 2D game, we want 2D nodes. You also have control nodes, which are basically different labels or pop-up or buttons, etc. But Node 2D has all the 2D things that you need. So you can see it under Node 2D. We have a few things for particles, sprites. You can animate some sprites. We also have collision objects. You can have a simple collision shape. You can also have different physics. So as you can see, static, rigid, and kinematic body. Static being essentially if you wanted to ground in your game, it would be a static body because it can interact with other things and things can interact with it, but it is not affected by gravity. It is a static object. Rigid body is something that is basically like a brick wall. It's very rigid, hence the name. Or maybe a basketball or something, I suppose. And kinematic body would be essentially your character or race car, whatever, your main thing that moves around about in this world that you're creating. and it's kinematic because in physics, kinematics is the physics of movement, etc. You get the point. Anyway, you also have collision shapes, which are very important. This way you can make sure that your physics objects are properly interacting with the rest of the world. For example, you wouldn't want square, well, maybe square, physics colliders on vehicle wheels because they're round. And kind of stuff like that. So you have multiple nodes that help you with this, and if you go down, we can actually see we have tile map. A tile map is essentially a image being repeated multiple times, or multiple images being repeated in a way that you can't really tell, but they're seamless textures that can line up with one another in order to create a vast world without an artist, or for example an indie game developer, creating this massive world with multiple unique pieces of art. You can essentially create say a dozen or so small tiles and have those repeated more or less at random. It's actually procedural is the correct term, and create this world for you. For example, Pokemon or No Man's Sky or even Minecraft would use these types of techniques. The most basic being Pokemon out of the three, of course, with basically every piece of the map is just a tile, and they have, I don't know how many, probably hundreds of them in the game, which are repeated through some kind of logic in the game in order to create this map that you would, the player, would then explore. And they do that so they don't have to spend hours and hours and hours, or heck, even weeks sometimes, creating these maps. Instead, all they have to do is just create a few tiles and tell the machine to place them according to this logic, which is what tile map does. So you can see as we scroll down, we even have some sound options, some touchscreen buttons, so if you're playing this on Android or iOS, some pathfinding options, etc. And the reason I mentioned Android, iOS is because when you click export, iOS isn't here quite yet, but I believe that's upcoming. You actually have multiple options to export, so I'm just going to get a drink of water. Sorry about that. So you have multiple options to export, which is another reason I love this engine. You can export to Android devices, so phones and tablets, BlackBerry, which is getting very quickly faded out, so I wouldn't worry about that one. HTML5, so you can publish this game to the web if you have your own website and throw it up there. Linux on the X11 system instead of the Wayland, I believe, which is the more advanced system, I believe is X11. You can throw it on Mac OS X or Windows, and you can see by the logo it's Windows 10 logo. So yeah, you can select your target, get a bunch of stuff. So if I select Linux, you get a bunch of stuff, 64-bit compatible resource images, etc. And we'll worry about that much later. But this video's probably gone on long enough. I got a bunch of stuff to do still, so I'm going to call it good for now. And in the next tutorial, I will show you guys some way of creating art for a game yourself with a few different programs. And hopefully we can actually get started in creating some sort of 2D game. Now, if you have any specific games you want in mind, throw them down in the comments, like different styles of games, or even better, if you can just name a game and I can create something in that style, or at least attempt to. And if this thing gets rolling enough, maybe I'll make a GitHub repo and a few of us can collaborate on this, because I think that would be a great way for us to all learn together how to use this engine, or just game development in general, as well as artwork. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.